Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Chanel Hayson. I am the Director of Outreach and Community Relations for the Elakha Alliance, and we are so honored to welcome you all to our fourth annual Sea Otter Science Symposium. And this year's focus is thinking globally and acting locally. So we have some amazing speakers for you for today's presentations. Just as a reminder, please use the Q&A feature. If you have questions for our presenters today, they will answer those questions directly after their individual presentations. And we will be giving away some fun prizes throughout the symposium today. So first off the bat, I have a Help Us Regain Our Oregon Roots painting drawing from Underdone Comics up in Seattle. And so with those online, I already did a quick random pick, and Greg McMurray, congratulations, you are our first winner of the day. So hopefully some other people might be lucky later on in the symposium, but I am going to pass it off to Bob Bailey, who is our board president for the Elakha Alliance, to introduce our first keynote speaker.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending the fourth annual Science Symposium of the Elakha Alliance. As Chanel said, we're kind of wrapping a sandwich around the idea of the broad scale global issues that we're embedded in, as well as zeroing in on very focused science related to sea otters, kelp, and other ecosystems. And I'm thrilled to have our first speaker is, if I can make this thing go, is Dr. Ralph Chami, who is Assistant Director at the International Monetary Fund. He's worked on a variety of issues for the past 24 years, but he's currently on sabbatical from the IMF to tackle the two risks to humanity: climate change and biodiversity loss. He has developed a model for valuing natural capital, including blue and green nature, as well as flora and fauna, and a framework for developing the natural capital markets for ecosystem services. He has co-founded two entities working on bringing this new paradigm to life: Rebalance Earth and Blue Green World. And Chanel will be putting links to those two organizations in the chat, so you can go to them if you want. They're especially Blue Green Futures has a list of his publications. Ralph has a PhD in economics from the Johns Hopkins University, an MBA from University of Kansas, and a BS from the American University in Beirut. His areas of expertise also include banking, financial markets, remittance, migration, climate change, and natural capital. I might also add that he's a semi-professional musician. In fact, the first time I met Ralph, on the background behind him was a large poster of a guitar pick. And I said, "Ralph, is that a guitar pick?" And he said, "It absolutely is." And so I've heard some of his music, and it's great. And I've also heard some of his presentations, and they are very thought-provoking, and I'm happy to pass it off to Ralph now. It's all yours.
Thank you, Bob.
I guess, Chanel, you could arrange for him to screen share.
He's got it, I think.
Okay.
It's all yours, Ralph.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Chanel. Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to be invited to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, about how we can go ahead, go forward and build an equitable and nature positive economy for tomorrow.
We're not seeing your screen yet, Ralph.
Yeah. Here we go.
At least I'm not.
I haven't.
There.
Okay, and let me put it in a presentation mode.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So where do we start this conversation? So why are we talking about the need to build a nature positive economy? What has changed, and what is it about? How do we go about it? And what does it deliver to us? aside from the immoral, the moral and the ethical imperative of looking after nature and its creatures, is there another motivation over and above the intrinsic value of nature that would push us in that direction? So, putting things in context, where do we start? Well, we start with the risks that humanity is facing. We all know about climate change risk, and much has been written, much has been discussed, much has been talked about. But also Sir David Attenborough and others have been talking about the risk to nature itself. And when I talk about nature, I'm not only talking about flora, I'm talking also about fauna. And I'm not only talking about green nature, but I'm talking also about blue nature. So we are facing two risks: the risk of course, climate change, and the risk to nature and the loss of its biodiversity. And the two, unfortunately, are linked due to human activity. We are the cause of much of what's transpiring as we speak. Now, in terms of fighting climate change or reducing climate change risk, we have defined the strategy, which is to reduce our carbon dioxide emissions and or offsetting our carbon dioxide emissions. The other, in terms of looking after nature, the idea is we need to invest in the protection, restoration, and regeneration of nature. So since these two risks are happening simultaneously at the same time, we do not have the time, nor can we afford to focus on one and then tackle the other. We need to tackle both at the same time. And the question is, well, how do we do so? How can we achieve reducing the risks of both the loss of biodiversity in nature itself and the climate calamity? Well, let's remind ourselves of Alice in Wonderland, when Alice got lost and met the cat Dinah and said, can you help me? I'm lost. Can you show me the way? And the cat said, well, where do you want to go? And Alice said, what if I don't know? And then the cat, with the beautiful answer, said, then what difference does it make? So in order for us to figure out a solution to these twin risks, we need to know how we arrived at this calamity, and in order for us to figure out what would be the strategy that would get us out of it, and then chart our way out of this tunnel that we find ourselves in. So why are we where we are? Because there's somewhere along the line, some people would like to think around the Industrial Revolution, maybe a bit before that, during the Enlightenment period, or the period what we refer to as the Cartesian paradigm, the Descartes work, where supremacy was given to the mind over the body, thereby separating humans really from their nature. And so that thinking that somehow we are outside of nature, that the economy is outside of nature, and I tried to represent it here as a circle, as an economy outside of nature. Notice that the circle for the economy is even larger than that of nature. That means if we're outside of nature, we can pull stuff out of nature, we can extract, we can pollute with impunity, because the economy circle can grow by itself. Whether nature circle grows or doesn't grow or implode on itself, somehow we got this erroneous idea that we can grow with impunity. Unfortunately, as we're finding out, that approach is not sustainable. This is what has resulted in the climate calamity, which has boomeranged back to us in terms of natural capital risk, and the two now are feeding on each other. And that's why we need to tackle both at the same time. So if you were to say, well, then what ought to be the correct paradigm? This is the current paradigm that I described in front of you. But what is the correct paradigm? Well, it's the one that our ancestors in older civilizations kind of knew, but we somehow forgotten along the way, which is the economy and our societies and our cultures are all nested inside of nature. We do not live outside of nature. Everything, our economy is 100% nature. When nature grows, we grow. When nature is stressed, we're going to feel it. COVID is one such example of it. So nature is macrocritical in the language of economics, meaning it's critical not only to our health, but our economic well-being. So if we're going to tackle this risk by minimizing the risk to nature and at the same time reducing the climate risk. What is the plan of action? Turns out that science has been telling us the solution is in front of us. If we were to invest in nature, then obviously we refer to that as a nature-based invest in nature. I'm not talking here about philanthropic giving, purely investment approach to nature over and above philanthropic giving, over and above altruism. We can not only reduce the risk to nature and the loss of its biodiversity, but the IPCC report, the latest one came out a few months ago, says nature can help us fight climate change by absorbing so much carbon dioxide, but about minimum of 38%, thereby reducing the risk of climate change. There you go. So we have the plan of action. If we were to invest in nature, we reduce the risk to nature. Nature boomerangs back by reducing the climate risk by at least 40%. Now, is nature investable? Is nature I mean, in what sense does nature help us out? Well, if we look at the blue economy itself, this is out of the IPCC report. Basically, this is the open ocean. Very little is written about it. Very little is known about it, but you can find it in some of the IPCC reports. The open ocean has been grabbing carbon. And by the way, the open ocean is anything outside of the 200 EEZ zone that each country claims. So it's really the orphan. It belongs to nobody, and therefore it belongs to everybody. And that ocean has been capturing so much carbon on behalf of all of humanity quietly. How much? Well, the scientists seems to have data since 1870, and they claim that that ocean, anything below 1,000 meters, all the way to the bottom of the ocean, has grabbed approximately 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide since 1870. Closer to shore, we have what we call the coastal blue carbon. This is, I'm referring to salt marshes, seagrass, mangroves, kelp forests, wetlands, and so forth. Corals to a certain extent, not much in terms of carbon. They absorb so much carbon dioxide. In fact, the seagrass is known for not only grabbing carbon dioxide, but also sequestering it for hundreds and hundreds of years, especially if undisturbed. And they not only grab carbon dioxide, which means they're great allies in the fight against climate change, but they do other things in terms of defense against flooding, because they're great barriers against the currents, and also providing for greater fish stocks. And now you're talking about the impact of the coastal blue carbon on food security. These are some of the ecosystem services that we know of, but there are many others that science continues to uncover. What else do we know? Well, science also tells us that in the oceans, there are these microscopic organisms called phytoplankton. They do something really incredible. They breathe just like us, but when they take in between 20 and 30% of all of the carbon dioxide that is outside, imagine. And in return, they give a lot of oxygen back to humanity. And if you'd like to know how much carbon dioxide these microscopic organisms grab on a yearly basis, that's equivalent to the work of 4 Amazon forests per year. That's how much carbon dioxide is really grabbed by the ocean. That's why we tend to think that the oceans are really the lungs of the planet. Now, not only is it that flora that grabs carbon, but it turns out that also fauna, or if you like, the animals. In this case, this is the work started with Andy Pershing's early paper, 2010, and where he documents how these great whales, these are the 9 species, grab so much carbon on their body, roughly about 9 tons of carbon, equivalent to 33 tons of carbon dioxide. And they are so heavy that when they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean. And marine scientists would tell you anything below 1,000 meters, unless disturbed, is basically sequestered forever. But they also do something really very interesting. They like to feed on krill. They eat, in fact, a lot of krill. And krill likes to feed directly or indirectly on phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton, for it to survive, it needs phosphorus, nitrogen, and iron. And all of these are found, of course, runoff from rivers and movement of wind over land. But in the Southern Ocean, no rivers, no movement over wind over land. they are found in the poop of the whale. So it's really a story about also the poop. Very powerful. It really fertilizes the phyto. So these great whales are very smart. They eat a lot of krill and they poop a lot at the surface, thereby fertilizing phyto. When the phyto becomes more active, there's more krill, and more krill, there's more food for these animals. But from our perspective, in terms of fighting climate change, when the phyto is more active, that means that it's grabbing more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So if we were to calculate how much does one whale contribute in terms of grabbing carbon dioxide directly on its body and indirectly through its fertilization of phyto, it turns out that one whale is equivalent to thousands of trees in terms of its ability to grab carbon dioxide. So that's in the ocean. On land, the cousins of these whales are the elephants. Here I'm talking about the elephants in the Congo Basin, in the tropical forests. They also do something very similar. They like to eat plants that are low in fiber and thus low in carbon, because plants that are low in fiber, they also are very high content of protein, and they have tremendous appetite for these plants, leaving the plants that are high in protein, low in fiber and therefore high in carbon, they leave them alone. So they have taste buds that really say, well, we'd like to eat those plants that are low in fiber. And this is work of Fabio Berzaghi, 2019 Nature article. He and his colleagues, they document that when elephants are present, the forest is able to capture more carbon than when they're absent. So how much carbon is sequestered in the forest due to the action of these elephants? Between 7 and 14%, depending on the density of the elephant per square kilometer. As long as that density is between 0.5 and 1 elephant per square kilometer, then elephants have an incredibly statistically significant positive impact on the ability of the forest to sequester carbon. And when those elephants are lost due to human activity, the forest is not a forest anymore. Okay, so this is more recent work by Fabio and his colleagues, where they show that elephants impact the forest. They call them, in fact, engineers, forest engineers, through their ability to disperse seeds, because they can eat certain fruits that only the elephants themselves can digest, through their fertilization and through the way they walk and they traipse on plants that are small, allowing bigger plants that have more carbon content to grow because they get more light and more water. So elephants on land are incredible allies in the fight against climate change, just like the whales, just like flora. Now, me being a financial economist, I thought, well, can we value the services of nature for us? We have, for example, an elephant that is grabbing carbon on our behalf over her lifetime. What would be the value of her work for us over her lifetime? So what's the present value of the carbon sequestration by a single elephant over her lifetime? If we're to apply just standard financial techniques to a population growth model of the elephants, we find that at a minimum, just in terms of carbon sequestration, if we were to calculate the lifetime earnings, the expected discounted present value of the lifetime earnings of a single elephant, it would be at minimum of $2.6 million. In fact, if you would like to give her a wage, pay her a wage for her work, a yearly wage would be close to about $70,000. If we were to value the amount of the value of the seagrass, the carbon sequestered by the seagrass, the amount is staggering. This is recent work that we're doing with Carlos Duarte, who is the father of blue carbon, coastal blue carbon. And we're about to issue the paper soon. We show that the value of carbon sequestration by seagrass globally is a minimum $3 trillion. Just imagine. We're not even counting the value of seagrass in terms of flood control or its impact on fish stocks. We can do the same if we were to pay the whale a wage for her work in terms of grabbing carbon on behalf of humanity. What would that wage be? First of all, let's calculate what is the discounted present value of her lifetime earnings if we're to pay her for grabbing all that carbon on our behalf. The minimum would be the present value of her lifetime earnings just from grabbing carbon would be $3 million. That's roughly about $76,000 or $80,000 a year if we were to pay her a salary for her work, which she's doing for us for free. In fact, if we can go back into the open ocean and ask ourselves, what is the value of that stock of carbon dioxide that is sitting at the bottom of that ocean, either in the water below 1,000 or all the way down at the bottom of the ocean? The stock of 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide at the equivalent at the bottom of that ocean is worth at least $30 trillion. Once you know the formula for the stock, which the scientists have figured out, we can calculate the flow on a yearly basis. And I would tell you that the flow on a yearly basis of carbon dioxide into the open ocean is worth, in terms of present value, another $30 trillion. So what this tells us is nature, flora and fauna, green and blue, is incredibly valuable to us. And the term we like to give to it is biodiversity, meaning it's not only about the tree, but it's about the tree and all of its functions. It's about the tree and interacting with the microbes and the animals. It's the life within the forest or the life within the ocean of a living and thriving nature is incredibly valuable to us. This is really new. I mean, the science has been there. Our ancestors knew about it, but giving a value to nature is basically trying to bring all that knowledge into a language that would allow us to engage policymakers and engage people in the private sector who cannot read science, and things from a philanthropic point of view may not appeal to them. This is basically translating all that knowledge in terms of dollars and cents and saying nature is very valuable to us, not only intrinsically for itself, but in terms of ecosystem services that are incredibly valuable to our own existence. So in a sense, what we are really describing is a new source of wealth. It's nature that has been out there. We always thought it was there. We thought it was ours for the taking, for the destruction. And now what we're discovering very quickly is that nature also needs to be looked after. So it's not infinitely lived, and it's not there also for the taking. We need to look after it. It's valuable. It's an asset. It's a new class of asset. Now, when you say it's a new class of asset, first question comes to mind is, well, can we benefit from it? Science tells us it's valuable. We can translate that knowledge of science into dollars and cents to engage policymakers and the financial sector and the private sector. But what else do we need in order to release the power of this nature? Well, we need the legal framing. After all, to have an asset enter a balance sheet for any person with a balance sheet, any owner of an asset, you need to codify it in the law. We need to understand under what law are we allowed to bring this asset into the balance sheet. So we need to understand what is the legal framing for nature. For example, does nature have its own rights? Should we treat nature, should we confer personhood on nature? Should we criminalize actions that would harm nature? Or is nature just an asset that is meant to produce value for humanity only? From the ocean's perspective, it's very clear, and I'm focusing on the ocean because land gets a lot of attention and we very little now, maybe perhaps less, we're getting, ocean is getting a bit more attention, but for the longest time, it was just thought it was a place to dump stuff in and to extract with impunity and not worry about it. Well, the ocean is a living system in its flora and its fauna. In fact, nature doesn't recognize green or blue flora and fauna. Nature is one breath. But for our own purposes as humans, we need to understand things in sort of categories in order to be able to make a decision. Well, here, what I'm saying is nature, especially in the case of the oceans, we need to think of it as a living system. And this whole paradigm, this new paradigm that I'm describing to you, is really based on the fact that on the change in our behavior from an extractive view of nature, which means you only view things from when you kill it, when you hunt it, when you cut it down to a regenerative view of nature, meaning allowing nature to be restored, to rejuvenate, and then find out that we can actually build a whole economy around it. Okay. So in terms of legal rights of nature, just want to give you some ideas about countries that have gone ahead with defining the relationship of their country and their citizens towards nature. In New Zealand, for example, they conferred personhood on the river, on one of their main rivers, imagine. So that river has the same rights and responsibilities as any one of us. And people in New Zealand have legal responsibilities towards that river. In Costa Rica, they conferred personhood on bees because they've realized the pivotal role that bees play in pollination. Why is that important? Because once you do the science, once the science tells us, informs us what we have, how much we have, and that would be on the left-hand side of this diagram. I call it the scientific assessment, or if you like, scientific accounting. We can do the valuation, the market valuation of the services provided by nature, be it flora or fauna, blue or green. We do the legal recognition. Then at that point, that natural asset changes into natural capital, becomes a financial capital. It enters the balance sheet of whoever owns that asset, be it the government, be it the indigenous population, be it local communities. On the demand side, why is that important? Because who's sitting on the demand? Who is going to demand the ecosystem services of nature? Well, guess what? There's a whole world out there that is demanding to reduce carbon content in the atmosphere to carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral, that will demand the services of nature. And therefore we can move to create a market around the supply of ecosystem services, and therefore to a world that demands those ecosystem services, and we come up with a price. Now, it's very important when we're talking about nature markets to keep some very important principles in mind. One is that we are not talking here about the sale of nature itself. In fact, I'm dead set against the sale of the natural asset itself. Those should be retained. The ownership should be retained by the indigenous communities, the local communities, or the countries where those natural assets are sitting. What we're talking about here is the sale of the ecosystem services, in this case, for example, the carbon services of nature, such that when you sell the ecosystem services, the money comes back to look after nature in perpetuity. That's the column in the middle, and to look after the stewards of nature in perpetuity. And that would be the local communities and the indigenous people. When we are talking about a new market, and this is a new market, nature markets are happening at a very fast speed now. We need to be careful. We need to keep those two principles in mind and other issues that come up, which is issues of equity. For example, in terms of equity, how do we ensure equity towards nature itself? How do we ensure equity towards current generation? And how do we ensure equity towards future generations? How do we ensure that all that wealth from the new assets go to nature, to look after nature in perpetuity, and the current generation and future generations? Well, in order to do so, one way, this is a mechanism for ensuring that the money goes where it's supposed to go. We can create something like a nature wealth fund. Okay, a nature wealth fund will go to basically to ensure that the money goes it's sort of an intergenerationally and intergenerationally, and to look after nature. It's by design. We cannot leave it to the markets to do so. We have to bake it into the system. Another issue that comes up, an issue of governance. How do we ensure when we are building this new market that we don't get double counting, we don't get people that are cheating, we avoid the greenwashing, all of these issues that are afflicting carbon markets today? Well, here's an example of how we can build what we call a blockchain approach to this. On the left-hand side, you have the potential buyers. Let's say we're talking about the carbon market. That doesn't have to be, it could be biodiversity. a market, whatever it is, the ecosystem service that we find a market for. On the left-hand side could be households that want to offset their carbon footprint, could be companies, industrial companies that want to offset their carbon footprint, could be financial companies that want to do so. They would pay money for the ecosystem services. They would get this credit. Notice here I have whale, I have seagrass, salt marshes, and the money would go to look after the recipients, in this case, to look after the asset itself and to look after the stewards of nature. We have to bake it into the system. The blockchain here ensures that there's full transparency as who's getting what, who's contracting with whom. Most importantly, that the local communities and indigenous people gets to see who is paying for what. Once we do that, notice we arrive at what I call the win-win-win model. In fact, there are 4 wins, but I got tired of putting too many wins into the slide. Who wins in this new economy? Well, the sellers of carbon credits or biodiversity credits, so it is. If it's the local government, for example, they're going to see an increase in revenue because the tax base, all that funding coming in is going to enhance the tax base. You'll get indirect expansion of the tax base, therefore your indirect revenue is going to increase. It would allow the local government to reorient spending to where it's needed, because now you have a natural asset that is self-financing. You get to diversify the economy. It certainly will improve the fiscal capacity and the fiscal stance of the government. Who else wins from this? Well, whoever is buying the carbon credits. Let's say Microsoft were to buy the carbon credits of the elephants or the seagrass or whatever natural system we have. Then Microsoft would get to say, okay, I'm getting the carbon credits. I'm also enhancing my ESG scores. I'm also achieving my SDGs 1, 3, 4, 8, 10, 13, 14, 15. It gets to put that on its website. And that is incredibly powerful for Microsoft vis-a-vis its consumers who are asking Microsoft, are you a good citizen of tomorrow? Are you a good citizen of this world? How are you ensuring that you're not only offsetting your carbon footprint, but you're protecting nature? How are you alleviating poverty? Are you contributing to communities? This is one way of doing so. Who else wins from this? Well, the local communities themselves, because the money is going to come in from the sale of, be it the carbon credits or the biodiversity credits, alleviating poverty, creating income, stabilizing people in their land. Because once we look after nature, once the money comes in to look after nature in perpetuity, we're creating resilience in nature. We're protecting it, we're restoring it, we're rejuvenating it. And when we do so, then we get to stabilize the people in their lands, which is incredibly important. So as you can see, in this new paradigm, this is Alice now coming out of her tunnel into the light. Everybody wins. There are no losers in this new paradigm that is nature-based or nature positive and is equity positive. Thank you.
Wonderful job, Ralph. I love when we can start our morning talking about whale poop. It's fantastic.
It's all about poop. And elephant poop too.
Okay. Well, if you have any questions for Ralph, please use the Q&A feature. We do have one question already for you. If the ocean outside the EEZ is a common asset, how can it be assigned to government as the asset owner?
Wonderful. You want me to answer each, or you want to group them together? I'm happy to answer this one right off the bat.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, good. So the idea, in fact, we are working on a project around the governance of the open ocean. We need, because we certainly do not want to assign it to any particular government. What we really need to do is create a global governance for the ocean. Imagine if we are able to create a global governance of the ocean. All member states could be part of it. Scientists would be part of it. IFIs could be part of it, national financial institutions, and such that we will be able to sell the carbon credits of that ocean with the money coming in to look after the ocean in perpetuity, the open ocean, and to of course invest in science. The reason I say that is because right now the open ocean is under threat of being mined, being dredged, and all of that activity, aside from the death and mayhem to our fellow creatures in the ocean, it risks taking all that carbon that is stored, pushing it back into the upper layers of the ocean and escaping back into the atmosphere. And if you think we have a problem right now, this is nothing compared to disturbing over 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide that is sitting now in the depth of the ocean. So we need to create a global governance around the ocean, okay, basically adopting this orphan that has been looking after us since time immemorial.
Wonderful. Okay, we have another question. How do you make sure there will always be a market for ecosystem services?
Oh, wonderful. So what do you define as a market? Demand and supply. So right now there's a carbon market, and I'm not enamored with the carbon market, but the carbon that let's just start with the carbon market. People talk about emissions. What people are not maybe appreciating is that even if we stop all the emissions today, suppose today we all agree we're going to turn off the spigot, I call it, or the faucet, right? We're still going to bake to death because there's so much carbon up in the atmosphere. So think of a tub, and the tub is full of carbon dioxide. That's due to all of the past emissions into the atmosphere. That's the stock of carbon dioxide sitting out there. And then we have the countries still emitting more carbon into the atmosphere from our own activities. So even if today we all agree we should shut off all the smokestacks and all of that and turn off the faucet, guess what? We need to drain the tub. And that is not something trivial. That's why we need nature, because only nature can drain that tub. So there is a market for it. By the way, that market price was zero pre-Kyoto protocols. Pre-Kyoto, the price of carbon was zero. Kyoto protocol came in, and then the price above zero. Paris Accord, you see the price going up. Today's market price for carbon on the European ETS, you can go to Google and type it in, it's over $100 per ton. The expectation is going to be in the hundreds. But carbon is one output of carbon sequestration, is one output of a healthy system, because a healthy system gives you many other ecosystem services or eco-functions, if you like. There are medicinal parts. I mean, the nature markets are trillions of dollars market out there. And I'm not talking about an extractive market. I'm talking about the regenerative market. So I'm not talking about oil and gas. I'm talking about nature markets themselves. So I don't think we are going to run out of things in terms of ecosystem services to sell. But what we may face is that the market itself does not happen. It's not the first time that we have buyers and sellers and they just can't meet. In fact, let me give you an example, a concrete example. When Europeans trade the carbon among themselves, they trade it at $100. When Africa of the world comes around and says, I want to sell my carbon, certified carbon, they get $10. Carbon is carbon. How is it that it's $100 in Norway? And how is it that it's $10 for Gabon? Because of issues of governance, issues of transparency, issues of information, of time, of commitment to nature. And that's why I talked about equity, I talked about governance issues. That's what can kill a market. So I'm not worried that the market, is there a market? Yes, but does it mean that the market will happen or happen in the way we'd like it to be? Not automatically. We have to bake it into the system. We have to be aware of what can create a market, what can actually cause a market not to happen and not to take place.
Thank you. We have lots of questions rolling in now. This is exciting. All right, let's talk about kelp Michelle asks, can you please comment on kelp as a mechanism for carbon sequestration? We know kelp is highly efficient at carbon capture, but as you know, there is debate over whether that carbon is actually transported to the deep ocean sediments for long-term storage. Where do you stand on the role of kelp systems in carbon sequestration?
Okay, I'm not an expert on kelp, but I recognize the role of kelp in carbon sequestration. The kelp, like mangroves, salt marshes, and others, also grab a lot of carbon. The issue here is not to disturb it. It's not only about kelp, it's about the life around kelp. What else is there that allows kelp to grab carbon? When we think of seagrass, for example, because I've done quite a bit of work on seagrass, seagrass needs the turtles, and the turtles need the tiger sharks. Without the tiger sharks, the turtles would destroy all of the seagrass bed. So it's not only just because people get fixated with sort of like we should plant trees, right? And the Germans did that, and look what happened. You plant pine trees, and then you get monoculture, and you get one virus, and it kills off the whole forest. It's about biodiversity. We need to have a systems approach. I'm not answering the question directly because I want to cast a wider net and say kelp, like seagrass, like others, grab carbon either in the stalk itself, in the leaves itself. The seagrass grabs it in the sediments. Mangroves do it in the mangroves itself. Different systems have different ways, but they do grab carbon, and if undisturbed, can keep that carbon for a very long time.
Awesome, thank you. So I know we're talking kind of big picture, but Jesse's asking, what are your thoughts on implementing this sooner and on a smaller, more localized scale? For instance, just on the Oregon coast, perhaps.
I'm all for it. In fact, this is not about governments implementing it. Local communities, I've been asked this question many times. People say, well, for example, peatland, I'm working in Scotland now, and I have a farmer that has a small parcel of land, and they have peat. And they're like, but we're small. I said, yes, but if you grab the other farmers with you, you guys now, we can form a portfolio, and suddenly you're not that small. And we sell the carbon credits of all of these farmlands, and then you can divvy it up among yourselves. So for the Oregon kind of coast, we can certainly do the same. We just need to do the following. What is it that you have? How much of it that you have? We need to know who owns, who can speak on behalf of that area. That's what I have found when I was trying to help indigenous people in sort of Ecuador and others, is who can speak on, who can sign that contract. Because if you want to sell on the voluntary market, right, whoever is buying from the other side needs to know, who am I dealing with? Who's on the other side of this contract? Who can speak? Because if you say, I'm going to sell you the carbon credits, let's just say for the sake of the argument, let's make it more concrete. It's Google, and Google wants to invest. They're going to say, okay, who am I dealing with? Who's on the other side of this contract? X. Does X have the legal rights to this parcel of land or this part of the coast? Can they also manage it? Because if you accept that money, your responsibility as owner of that asset is to look after that asset in perpetuity, because only when that asset is alive and well and thriving can it grab carbon. So you need to provide assurances to whoever is buying the ecosystem services, be it carbon, be it biodiversity, whatever you want to call it. You need to provide assurances. And that's why I said we can use blockchain technology to basically create that transparency. And also they need to know, is that money really going to look after the asset, or the local government or some government is pocketing it? That's why we create a trust fund. And that trust fund makes sure that the money goes to look after the asset and to look after these communities. Why is that? Let me be blunt with you. Because if I'm Google and I'm investing and I'm putting on my website, I'm getting my carbon credits, I'm enhancing my ESG scores, and I'm hitting SDGs, all of these, alleviating poverty, blah, 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 then some investigative reporter is going to get on a plane, fly over to where I'm doing all of this and saying, is the money really going to do this? You see? That's what I've in my work, what I'm witnessing and I'm experiencing firsthand is these questions are coming about. How do we ensure that whoever is buying the carbon credits or the biodiversity credits can be assured that the money is going to do what it's supposed to do? Because you're going to sell them a certificate, and the certificate is going to say, this is a resilience certificate. It's not only a carbon certificate. This is a certificate that enhances carbon sequestration, alleviates poverty, creates employment for the local communities, looks after nature, and whoever is buying it needs assurance. That's what makes a market, is solving these issues of governance and transparency.
Great. All right. Andy asks, how do you convince world governments to adopt the concept of natural capital when economies are so focused on extractive industries?
Value proposition. I'm advising, I don't want to name, but certain entities. I was in one, let me give you a concrete example if you allow me. I was in one country, a small island, and people in charge were saying, well, the developer wants to dredge the swamp. And I said, what are you defining as a swamp? And they said, the swamp over there. I said, yeah, but that looks to me like mangroves. They said, oh yeah, that's mangrove swamp. I said, that's not a swamp. Do you know how much mangroves you guys have? So once they gave me the data, I calculated with my colleagues who work with me, and they were sitting on $1 billion worth of carbon credits.
Wow. So
I said, now the developer wants to dredge the $1 billion swamp, really? And at the minimum, you should, if that swamp belongs to the developer, I'm sure the developer is going to figure out I'm better off leaving the swamp as it is, making more money off it than building some hotel that's going to make me so much little money. So it's a value proposition. It's about meaning, if you don't have a value for seagrass, somebody will come around and say, oh, why don't I build a marina here? Why don't I dredge it and build something, because it has no value to you. But once you have a value, and that value is a market value, this is not a shadow value, please be careful. This is a purely market-driven valuation, meaning it's a value that the financial markets can get their heads around it very quickly. I come from the markets. So I didn't want to create my own price or my own value. I'm using purely market techniques, which means a trader can understand what I'm talking about like this. So you present the case and you say, look, you can build a marina and the local government will make X dollars, or we can leave the seagrass or the salt marsh or the mangroves or the kelp forest as is and make Y dollars, and Y dollars are greater than X dollars. And then let the chips fall where they may. So it's not about, loving nature and philanthropy and all of this is fine and good, but it's not helping us. That's why nature is dying. This is a proposition that sits side by side with philanthropy and altruism and love of nature for itself. It says there's an additional reason why we need to keep nature alive and well and thriving, which is purely human-centric. It doesn't take away from all of the other motivations. That's how you convince the government. And I was able actually to convince the government. In fact, in another case, the government was about to dig for oil and gas, and the companies had spent quite a few $1 million doing the sort of the testing. And then I was asked, should we allow them? I said, well, let's see. You have seagrass worth billions of dollars, and now you're going to allow this company to dig and pollute and destroy in order to pull oil and gas. And how much money are they going to make for you? X dollars. I said, but you get Y dollars from selling the carbon credits of your seagrass without touching it. So Y is greater than X. Now, will it always be Y greater than X? No. But at least you get a much better understanding of what are your opportunities, what are your options, and options have value. The other, flip it around, if you allow me 1 minute, flip it around, is a very nice corollary to this work. If you look at in the past, when you hear about tankers that running aground and releasing all that oil and destroying beautiful, pristine nature. In the past, we had no value for that nature, right? So what was the cost to the company who polluted all these beautiful waters? Was the cost of the cleanup. If there were a beach next to it, okay, fine. What is the impact on the beach and tourism? But this one, once you value your seagrass and salt marshes and wetlands, if there's any harm from any such activity, you know exactly how much to sue them for. This is huge because we've never had that before. We have now a legal basis for basically going after these companies, which will have a repercussion, a kind of a, just solve it backwards. Now you're going to get insurance companies saying, wait a minute, to these companies saying, when we insured your tanker, we had no idea that seagrass or kelp forests were worth that much. So you have to build better ships. You have to have better technologies because we can't afford to indemnify you in case of one of your ships breaking apart and releasing all that pollution into the water.
Wow. Thank you, Ralph. This has been phenomenal. I'm sorry we can't get to everyone's amazing questions right now, but we are at our time, so we can have a little bit of a break to run and refill your coffee mug before our next presenter. But thank you so much. Is there any last parting words you want to leave with anyone?
If I may, we need to come home to the only home we'd ever know. Carl Sagan used to say, when he wrote that beautiful essay called The Pale Blue Dot, right? He called it the only home we've ever known, Earth. And I would say the only home we will ever know. It's been humanity, I mean, nature's been looking after us from the beginning of time. And we need to come home while we still have time. We need to look after it. Life is give and take. And guess what? It's not just, if we give, we're going to take a lot more than what we're giving. That's what I'm trying to show you. This is what I call development that is sustainable and by design is shared. This is the new economy of tomorrow. When somebody tells you, well, how should we live tomorrow? Nature is our home. Nature is not an afterthought. Thank you so much for your time.
Yay, amazing. I know, I love the quote in your presentation. I wrote it down. Nature is one breath.
One breath.
That just stuck. Okay, Bob, take it away.
You've done exactly what I hoped you would do with your talk as a quote unquote keynote speaker, which is to expand our thinking about the task before us of sea otters and kelp and local communities and so on. And I appreciate so much you're taking time from, I know, an incredibly busy schedule all over the globe, as a matter of fact, and taking time away from your music too, to come speak to us today. So don't worry, we know where you live. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. It's an honor for me. Thank you for giving nature a voice. Bye-bye now.